Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting webinar. This is a joint collaboration with the Anteater, Sloth, and Armadillo Specialist Group and TIES, the Teacher Institute for Evolutionary Science, both of which have had Elizabeth Shreeve, author and expert, present for both organizations in the past. But now we are coming together to talk about the wonderful Xenarthran group of Armadillo with her new book. And with that, thank you, Elizabeth, for agreeing to present for us. And if you're attending this live, you can type in your questions in the chat box. And if you participate, your chances of winning a book increases tremendously. And Elizabeth, we're looking forward to your presentation.
Great. Thanks, Kenny. Hi, everybody. We're here to celebrate some of nature's oddballs, and we have some wonderful experts with us. I love this Venn diagram of the TIES and the Xenarthrans group. It's a real happy place for me. This book is a companion book to the Upside Down Book of Sloths. You can see it here in the photograph, and which came out last year, both from Norton Young Readers. Let's see. I am a science writer. I write books for kids, and I'm really kind of obsessed with the topic of evolution and origins of life on Earth and biodiversity. And so those interests have led to getting to know the great people at TIES and the great people at the Sloth Specialist Group. Upside Down Book of Sloths came out last year, and Out of the Blue came out a couple of years ago and is newly out in paperback. And it's a wonderful kind of introduction for kids ages 6 to 9 to the topic of evolution. And in February, my next book comes out on an ocean journey. So I really love writing about these topics and learning about them. And like most science and nature writers, I take inspiration from running around, going to national parks and looking at fossils, and also, of course, natural history museums. This is the Florida Museum of Natural History. I really love tracing how these strange and wonderful animals adapt over time to prehistoric ecosystems and developing strange and wonderful features through time. And I love taking that to kids, usually with puppets and with, in this case, full-size fabric image of a giant ground sloth. This is a school in the Boston area. Kids kind of relate to animals, especially oddball animals. I think sometimes kids feel like oddballs, and so they like to learn about weird and strange animals. And it's also a wonderful treat to celebrate the Americas, South America, Central America, North America. And a lot of kids today in our schools come from those areas. So it's sort of wonderful to use animals as a way of teaching about those areas and teaching about migration as well. And of course, you can always throw in some giant ground sloth coprolite to really gross people out and get them interested. I actually have earrings that are made of coprolite, and so I usually can get some groans from children when I point that out. The Xenarthra, of course, are the anteater sloths and anteaters of the world that got their start in South America. The cingulata, the armadillos, split from their cousins around 66 million years ago and diversified, and it's, have a wonderful complex history of tromping around the Americas and back and forth between the continents. And it can be complex, but we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about bringing this information to kids. But if you do want more detailed information, go to this terrific webinar, which Kenny also led and is on their website, with Greg McDonald, who's just such a great resource. He's a terrific guy. I don't know if Greg's with us today, but he's a real authority. And of course, our very own Mariella Superina here with a giant armadillo, and xenarthrans.org is the go-to authoritative place for information on these terrific creatures. So I actually dedicated the Armadillo book to Mariella and Greg, who helped me so much, along with some others, but really made it possible for me to present this information to children. So this new book, the Oddball Book of Armadillos, came out September 3rd. So it's still in its babyhood. It came out from Norton Young Readers, illustrated by Isabella Grott, as was the Sloth book. And both books pair and compare living species with prehistoric species. So I was interested in kind of pointing out what's different, and then also what are some of the characteristics that haven't changed over time, and how scientists figure those things out. So I'm not going to read the book because it's too much to read. These books are for 7 to 10-year-olds, so there's a little bit too much text. But I will read just this first setup page. Armadillos, are they giant roly-poly bugs? Time-traveling dinosaurs? Crazy mixed-up turtle rabbits? No, they're armadillos, the only mammals with bony outside coverings called carapaces. You may have seen these little critters snuffling through the woods around sunset. But did you know there are many different types of armadillos, and some of their prehistoric relatives grew as large as cars? Well, pull on your boots. It's time to track down some real live oddballs. So that sets up the story. And then we go on to meet some oddballs. There are about 23 types of living species of armadillos right now. But as this book was kind of just had been printed, Mariella counseled me to calm down, because apparently there are more species being identified. The 9-banded, which is the one we have here in the US, is being subdivided into separate species. But we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to sort of enjoy these wonderful, strange and unique creatures that look reptilian. In fact, I went to the San Diego Zoo and asked where I could find an armadillo, and they sent me to the reptile section. But they are not. The little armored ones are mammals, and they have hair, and they give birth to live young, and all the things that mammals do. Over time, as the continents came together on the Panamanian land bridge, armadillos moved south alongside some of the other distinctive South American species like sloths. And today we only have one type of armadillo. It crossed the Rio Grande into Texas fairly recently, and it also escaped from some zoos and circuses in Florida, and it's doing really well. It's adapted very nicely to kind of suburban American landscape. This is the 9-banded armadillo, unique for its reproductive patterns of identical quadruplets, as we'll see soon. And a different version of this long ago was what is known as the beautiful armadillo, and nobody seems to know why it's called the beautiful armadillo. And some people even think it was a joke because maybe it wasn't beautiful, but I think it's kind of cool. It looks a lot like the 9-banded, only it was bigger, and it did in fact get to some more northern locations. It also had, there's evidence that it also gave birth to quadruplets, 4 identical young, which is pretty interesting. So these guys tromped around, around 1.5 million years ago to about 11,000 years ago, and they did make it up to North America. Here you see some of those species that came north with the Great American Biotic Interchange when the land bridge finished forming around 3 million years ago. And of course, the many species that moved south, and including the carnivores that kind of moved in, the bears and the dogs and the big cats that then took over that top level predator position, but a lot of other things like the horses and so forth that moved into South America. And what we have now in Texas is a lot of armadillos. And when the children of Texas back in the 1990s were asked to choose an official state mammal, they couldn't decide. There was a vote, and it was an even split between the Texas longhorn and the nine-banded armadillo. And so the leaders of Texas legislature decided to make two categories. They have a large state mammal and they have a small state mammal. So the nine-banded armadillo is the official small state mammal of Texas, as attributed with the attributes that distinguish a true Texan, such as a deep respect and need for the land and a fierce, undying love of freedom. So there you go. So if ever you thought there's a humble little creature, just remember that fierce, undying love of freedom of the armadillo. It's really an amazing kind of body structure, right? It has its full interior skeletal structure, but it also has this exterior bony carapace. It's the only mammal that has that. And when you think of an animal with a shell, you might think of a lobster or a turtle or some kind of dinosaur. But it has these osteoderms, these little bony structures that make up a shell, and the shells vary between species. Some of the prehistoric sloths had these osteoderms as well. Armadillos vary in size from the tiny little pink fairy armadillo that's only about 4 ounces and about 6 inches long. And I really think that these guys look like shrimp sushi, but they have kind of a mixed reputation. In some places of South America are considered to be a sign of bad fortune, totally undeserved. And in contrast, you have the great glyptodonts, like Didicurus, I think that's how we say it. And you can see the contrast in the size between the pink fairy armadillo that's 4 ounces and these giant monsters that were 13 feet long and weighed over 2,400 pounds. Lived a couple million years ago up until about 10,000 years ago and sported these pestle-like spiked tails. And were like big tanks that kind of rumbled around and left their fossils behind to amaze us. They're really quite remarkable creatures. Charles Darwin found them remarkable as well. And they were really important to his understanding and inspiration for understanding evolution, because he quite fancied a meal of armadillo when he was sailing around on the Beagle. He said that a meal of armadillo, when fat and roasted, is most excellent eating. But in addition to eating the armadillo, he saw the fossil remains of the big giants and saw that they were structurally the same, and started to understand how these fossils showed the prehistoric extinct forms of animals that live today. And that was a big, important link to him. And of course, today we have more sophisticated ways of understanding what goes on inside an armadillo. We have computer scans. This is an image from the work of Rachel Narducci at the Florida Museum of Natural History. And of course, we have molecular data as well to understand the DNA and genomic relationships. One thing I really love about armadillos is the amazing array of adaptations they have. And this is a great key for teaching and understanding, getting kids to understand evolution in terms of adaptation to environment as defensive, or ways to gather food or hide, or whatever the adaptation is intended for. So they're really tough critters, and they, in addition to their carapaces, some of them jump up in the air like the nine-banded. They have these long claws that they use to defend themselves as well as to gather food. And this particular adorable guy here, the screaming hairy armadillo, reaches all of 2 pounds, but I have not heard in the wild, but I bet Mariella, you have. It it kind of looks like just a piece of coconut shell, but apparently when it's distressed, it just gives out these blood curdling screams. And I've heard tapes of them, and they're pretty wild, and that scares away their predators. So I do love this. I do love this piece of artwork from the book that Isabella Grott created. I think it's really adorable. Look at those ears. Most of the big prehistoric relatives of armadillos were herbivores, and today, of course, they're great insectivores and omnivores. But there was one species, the Macroeuphoractus, that was a hypercarnivore, meaning that most of its diet was meat, and it has a different tooth structure and shows signs of being hyper carnivore. I don't know, these guys, can you imagine meeting them? They were high on the food chain, along with the flightless terror birds. And then later, when the land bridge formed and those big other animals, those big carnivores came in from North America, these animals were extinct by that time, and a whole new set of carnivores and top predators took their place. Here you can see a little bit of those osteoderms, what's called bone skin. And these were also found in some of the giant ground sloths, had a kind of a reinforced skin. So it's different than a pangolin. At one point, the pangolin and the armadillo were thought to be related, but in fact, it's convergent evolution, and they came together to have a sort of similar adaptation, but in a different way. So a pangolin's overlapping scales are made of keratin, like our fingernails, but armadillos actually have bone inside the skin, these osteoderms. So it's a different way of kind of getting to the same place. And of course, the teeth is another way that scientists traced the lifestyle and the diet of prehistoric animals as well as living animals. So we know that armadillos and Xenarthrans have these kind of constantly growing teeth with no enamel. And the ones that were more carnivorous, like that Macroeuphoractus, had sharper teeth. But in general, there's these kind of peg, about 30 cone-shaped peg teeth in their mouths, perfect for munching on insects and plants. The claws are the thing, right? I mean, this giant armadillo has the largest claws of any living mammal, 8 for its size, 8 inches long. And I know some of you have seen that in the wild. I would love to see a giant armadillo. And this species has lots and lots of teeth also, and they just rip open a termite mound or an ant colony and slurp up their dinner with a big, long, sticky tongue, like an anteater, I guess, but anteaters don't have that hard carapace, but they are cousins. They're cousins, and they love a good dinner of insects. It can gobble up thousands of ants or insects in a single night. And they also serve a real sort of ecosystem engineering role. They often will change their burrows. They dig their very ambitious big burrows with those giant claws, and they'll stay a night or two, and then they'll move on. And other animals come and use the burrows, like the beautiful ocelot that you see here. So that giant armadillo is a pretty big guy. They are rare and secretive and not doing all that well because of loss of habitat. So while we have in the United States, we have the 9-banded, and they're thriving, and they're kind of a nuisance, considered a nuisance. There's plenty of species of armadillo and others in Arthrans that are not doing so well and need their habitat protected. I love this horned armadillo. This is a really, really ancient species that lived from about 25 to about 10 million years ago. And it's only 24 pounds, but look at that face. I mean, goodness, why the horns? Nobody seems to really know why it had these horns. Maybe it helped with digging, maybe it helped with hunting, maybe it was a sexual selection kind of thing, but strange little creature. I would like to see one of these alive someday. So the claws are the thing, the strange carapace are the thing, and some of these features have not changed over time. So we see what's different and we see what's the same. Another unique adaptation of the 9-banded armadillos, as I mentioned earlier, is the family, the strategy of reproduction. They produce quadruplets, identical quadruplets, and that seems to be going pretty well for them because they are expanding their range and they're doing pretty well. This strategy works especially well. Kenny pointed this out to me, that it works well when the environment is stable. It doesn't provide for a lot of genetic variation. So if there were change in the ecosystem, some kind of natural event, it might not be as much of an advantage to have 4 identical animals, because it would provide for less adaptability as conditions change. But you got either 4 little girl babies or 4 little boar babies, and they are identical, and then they grow up and they go their own way. They don't live communally. They're pretty independent. They're also really well adapted to life underground. They don't have good eyesight, but they, in fact, Jim Loughran told me that he's seen armadillos that just will run straight smack into a tree. They don't see all that well. But they do have a pretty good sense of smell, and they can detect things with their little whiskery hairs, like a cat's whiskers. And they also have special structures in their nostrils that will filter out soil, so they can go underground without inhaling a lot of soil, and they can survive on the low oxygen environment down there. One thing they can't do is really adapt to cold. Their body temperatures run low, which is one reason that the 9-banded do carry, that's what I'm looking for, the disease. Anyway, it'll come to my mind. And they don't have a lot of fat. Their carapaces lose heat quickly, and they can freeze pretty easily. So some grow long hair and some actually hibernate, but most pretty much stick to comfortable territory. The peachy little armadillo will actually hibernate and goes dormant for a while. One of the types of armadillos that did come up to North America were the Pamphotheres, named for the grasslands in South America. And those fossils of the Holocene have been found up in Kansas and across Texas and Oklahoma. And they were bigger, so bigger animals tend to be able to tolerate the cold more easily. They can walk under the water. They really get around, and in parts of the US, in fact, they're kind of considered a nuisance, and they're referred to as Texas speed bumps, because they do get run over a lot on the roads, and sometimes they are eaten. They were called Hoover's hogs because people ate them during the Depression. And then finally, of course, they're known for rolling up in a ball. Only one species, the 3-banded armadillo, can actually roll up completely into a ball. And it doesn't tend to burrow. It relies on that ability to roll up in a ball as its primarily defense. So they can defend themselves by curling up into spheres about the size of a cantaloupe melon. 1 minute, the little creature is waddling along like a wind-up toy, and the next moment, presto, it's a total oddball. So life on Earth is constantly changing. And what does the future hold for armadillos? Could there someday be an enormous, hairy, meat-eating, armor-protected armadillo that digs caves, grows horns, crosses wide rivers, and screams? Could it take over everywhere? Well, it's not likely. Many armadillos live in South America, like the peachy and the giant armadillo, and they need our help to protect them and their habitats. But as the climate warms, the 9-banded armadillo will likely continue to expand their range up into North America and elsewhere in South America as well. With few natural predators, they'll reclaim territories where prehistoric armadillos once lived. Will they ever cross mountains and deserts into California and onto Seattle? Could they trundle as far as Wyoming, New Hampshire, or even across the border to Canada? Time will tell, but one thing's for sure. In North America, the hardy and pioneering 9-banded armadillo, official state small mammal of Texas, is on the move. I love this piece by Isabella. I think it's really beautiful. Here's a little bit of more information on that expansion issue. You see this image from Mariella's site there. You see how the 9-banded is on the northern most of South America and headed up into North America. And there are some estimates and projections that will get even farther to the north. So in bringing this book to the world, I love to kind of make things work for teachers and support teachers as they use nonfiction books. And so a teacher friend and I developed a teacher guide, and with help from Kenny and others, we invented a game called the Adaptation Game. It's a card game for schools, and basically each kid, after reading the book, each student gets a worksheet with a little kind of proto-mammal on it in a little chart, and they get to choose from a selection of traits cards, bigger body sizes, smaller body size, you can fly, you can burrow, and so forth. And then the teacher reads off a series of natural events. And each of these natural events has survival points associated with it, so that if you hold a certain trait in your card deck, you get a point. And so as you have a chance to refine again and again, and more natural events happen, eventually you fill out your chart and you figure out what your chance of survival is. So we have, this is all on my website, it's downloadable and it's free. And we also have card deck sets that will be available through my husband's toy store in Sausalito. So just let me know if you're interested in that. Another game that I want to recommend is on the TIE's website. It's the Time Machine game. And this is an online kind of natural selection game that's really, really fun and easy to play and easy to share with classrooms. So if you're interested in more information on the book, absolutely go to my publisher, go to my website, all the links are there. I love doing school visits, and I have a school visit agent at How Now Booking. So you can either let me know directly or you can go to my website. And I also have videos and book trailers and so forth on my YouTube channel. And now we have time for questions. I did see some questions kind of coming in. And Kenny, do you want me to start with questions, or do we want to take questions? We have the first one is for Mariella, I think.
Well, great presentation. Thank you, Elizabeth, for doing that.
Sure, you bet.
Why don't you ask your 3 questions, and then I'll give a summary about the 2 hosts, and then we do have some comments and questions in the
Okay.
chat. So why don't you do your 3?
Okay. So these are questions that I'm curious about, and I knew I'd be talking and I would want to stop talking. So we have some questions for our experts in the room. Mariella, what do you find especially interesting about armadillos?
Not an easy question, actually. There's so much stuff that is interesting about armadillos that I don't even know where to start. I mean, the anatomy. They're the only mammals with a carapace. Their physiology, they have a low metabolic rate, so they have to eat less to survive. And they also have a low and variable body temperature. So originally, researchers thought that they were not able to maintain their body temperature at a stable level. But actually, it's very clever because when they're running around, they just heat up and they don't care about lowering their temperature. And if they're just relaxing, their body temperature goes down and they don't waste any energy in maintaining it higher. So I think it's quite clever what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, the evolution. These guys have been around for over 60 million years and they are the real Americans. And that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
You won't find them anywhere else than in the Americas. What else? The cultural importance. I think that's fascinating to see that the indigenous communities, local people have been eating and using armadillos for centuries. So they use their carapace as bowls, for example. They have traditional medicines. They appear in folk tales, in songs, and ceramics. So, they are important in the Americas to people. And then all this diversity. You mentioned the pink fairy armadillo that looks like a piece of sushi. And you have giant armadillos that look like a living fossil. And actually, we don't even know about the diversity. As you mentioned, we talked about 20 species. And in the meanwhile, there's been a paper dividing the 9-banded armadillo into 4 species. And that's, I mean, it's incredible because we thought that is the armadillo species that we best knew. And actually, we didn't know anything about it. So now we have about 23 species, but this will change probably. And I think it's also especially interesting to see that we don't know so much about armadillos. Although they are so fascinating and so different, there's so much more we need to learn about them. So there's so much interesting about these animals that we could talk for hours about them.
Right. Thank you. You're an inspiration. I remember at one point I emailed Mariella and said, how did you get into this anyway? It was great.
Oh, yeah.
That's another story, but
yeah.
Okay, Bertha, how can armadillos with their unique body features and behaviors help children understand animal adaptations and the process of evolution?
Well, I think you answered some of that, or you covered some of that when you went over your book for sure. But I was thinking, well, in terms of adaptation, I think kids would love to hear more about the armor. You know, the fact that this is an animal, but it has like a protective shell. That's such a prime example of adaptation. Their diets also are so specialized, including, usually ants and insects, and how their strong claws, long tongues are adaptations for foraging in those environments. And they're such good burrowers. And I think that would be a really fun lesson where the kids could try to burrow themselves and, discuss how that adaptation helps them find shelter, escape predators, and regulate their body temperature. In terms of evolutionary relationships, it's a great way to show fossil record because of how they've changed over time. You could go and discuss common ancestry with other mammals, like sloths and anteaters. And you could also talk about convergent evolution, because you could discuss how armadillos and other armored animals like pangolins have emerged on the same adaptation, but from different corners of the animal kingdom. And not just pangolins that are mammals, but also there's so many little insects that do the same little roll up in a ball, oddball insects, I guess you can call them. So there's a lot of directions you can take this in a classroom. I think it's an animal that kids will be excited about learning.
Great, thanks. Okay, Kenny, what other animals are useful for introducing kids to those aspects of science?
I would say any animals that they're interested in are great for introducing evolution and adaptation to kids. But the first one that came to mind are whales, but then I expanded it to not just cetaceans, but pinnipeds, which are the seals, sea lions, and walruses, and then also the Sireniae, which are the manatees and the dugongs, because all marine mammals evolved from land animals. But if you go back further, those animals evolved from aquatic animals.
Yeah,
So
everything
that's
came
what-
out of the ocean, right?
Yeah, they came out of the ocean, but then these marine mammals went back into the ocean.
Yeah.
And then we were talking about armadillo relatives, sloths. Sloths are, you can see some transitional fossils, but there's a big gap between ground sloths and arboreal sloths. So we don't have those fossils. So kids can try to figure out what those creatures looked like between the 2,000, 4,000 pound ground sloth to our 20-pound arboreal sloth. And then a great animal that people are connected with are domestic dogs and cats, because you can see how evolution can work very quickly. And everybody is connected to a pet.
Yeah. Yeah, look at all the diversity among dogs. It's wild. Okay, thanks. And I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll go to, I think there's some questions that came in on the chat. So I'm going to.
So before you do that, Elizabeth, I sent you a private message.
Okay.
If you want to read that and respond to me. And as you do that, I'm going to do a quick talk about the two hosts for today.
Let's see. Find.
I'm going to mute you just for a minute, Elizabeth. All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Kenny Coogan, and I am part of the specialist group, and I am part of TAG. That is why I get to present. So Elizabeth did a great job. She sent, I have my own Elizabeth bookshelf now with signed copies of her books, and this Armadillo book, like her Sloth book and Out of the Blue, are both beautiful. The Xenarthran Specialist Group, our real name is Anteater, Sloth, and Armadillo Specialist Group, and we're part of the International Union of Conservation of Nature Species Survival Commission. So we want to see all of these animals thrive. To learn more about them, you can go to our website, which is xenarthrans.org. We are on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, where we post all of our webinars. And if you go to our main page, xenarthrans.org, you will see that we have at least 38 species profiles for all of the armadillos, all of the sloths, and all of the anteaters. We have not separated those 9-banded armadillos yet. We're still waiting on some consensus, but we have a lot of great information, and we have excellent news. The Xenarthra, which is the journal for our specialist group, has been accepted into the DOAJ, Directory of Open Access Journals. So now we can reach even a wider audience. And if you do research with Xenarthrans, or if you feel like you have something to publish, send Mariella a message, and then you can see our author guideline. And before we were publishing the journal once a year, but now it's rolling submissions, and you can learn more by going to our website. If you go to the species descriptions, you'll see that they're kind of scientific. We talk about what they physically look like, but also their habitat and ecology, and their diet, and their ranges of reproduction. But in the past year or so, we have taken the information and we have turned it into kid-friendly K-12 resources. We have 4 beautiful animated videos, one about each of the groups, anteaters, sloths, and armadillos, and then we also have a video about the past and present Xenarthrans. And with each of these animated videos, which are all available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, all of these videos come with free downloadable worksheets, coloring sheets, mazes, word searches, spot the differences, and all of those resources are available in different languages. And we like to celebrate ours and Arthurins. International Armadillo Day is always on August 13th. International Sloth Day is always the third Saturday of October. So that means the date changes. And World Anteater Day is always November 19th. And that date changed a few years ago because, like just out in the wild, that jaguar group, they bullied us and they took our Anteater Day. So we found a new day because we cannot compete with the jaguars. We like to do monthly webinars. The next one coming up is about the conservation of one of the three-banded armadillos. If you work with Arthurins, you can submit your photos to us, and we would love to share them on our social media pages. If you feel inspired to donate to our organization, you can go to the top where it says donate, and you can give money for equipment or areas of conservation. Or if you don't want to just give us money, you can go to our international store where we have lots of different merchandise. I'm wearing a giant Anteater t-shirt right now. We have different types of anteaters. We have sloths. We have the glyptodonts. We have giant ground sloths. You can get them on t-shirts, tote bags, stickers, tank tops, and all of the proceeds benefit our education and our conservation funds. And we have two partner institutions who help us do the webinars and all of our educational content. And those are FIA, which is the Foundation for International Aid to Animals, and Nurtured by Nature. And that is a little summary about the IUCN Anteater Armadillo Sloth Specialist Group. And now I'm going to talk to you briefly about TIES, the Teacher Institute for Evolutionary Science. Our website is tieseducation.org. We are on Facebook, and we also post all of our monthly or bi-monthly webinars on our YouTube page as well. We wrote a book, and it is available for sale right now. Buy one, get one free, because unlike Mariella, we're up here in North America, and school has just started. So all the teachers are back, and we encourage you to pick up a copy of this book. And if you go to our website, you'll see that all of those resources are free. The only thing we charge is the book because we have to print it. A sister organization for TIES is Science Saves. And this is a nonpartisan effort to promote science appreciation by highlighting the many ways science has unleashed human potential, transformed our lives, and given us the tools to overcome all manner of challenges. So just like TIES, all of our resources are free, they're downloadable, and what we found that teachers really like is that our resources are editable. You can edit them. So you can add your own name, and you know your students the best, so you can delete something, add something, and want you to utilize our resources. And we have, for Science Days, we also talk about National Science Appreciation Day. We're trying to get all 50 states and then eventually the whole world to celebrate science. You can learn more about that by going to our website. And then we have videos. If you want to have a guest speaker, we can do that. And every year in May, we have a very exciting video scholarship contest where we have graduating seniors apply, and what they have to do is they make a 30-second video about how science has impacted their lives. So they can talk about insulin, they can talk about getting a blood transfusion for leukemia, they can talk about having an artificial limb, or they could talk about giving their sister Tylenol to overcome an asthmatic attack. And so they make a 30-second video, high quality, of course, and the first prize gets $10,000 that they can use freely for their college. And then we have also second, third, fourth prizes. And if you know students who are approaching their senior year, please tell them about this. And the last project I'm going to talk to you about is Generation Skeptics. And this program aims to develop and foster an understanding of the world through inquiry-based learning. All of our resources are free, and we encourage you to check them out. And for this program, we really want you to reach out if you have somebody that you want to drop into your classroom. We can find you a speaker for free. So we have speakers who can talk about ghost hunting. We have speakers who can talk about magic, psychics, and of course we're debunking all of these things because we want to instill skills in young people like not taking things for face value and to question their own beliefs. All right, Elizabeth, are you still with me? Usually I just have to talk for 4 minutes, but today was 8 minutes. All right, Elizabeth. Mindy says, this is such a wonderful overview of armadillos with so much information written so accessibly. I think parents reading this out loud to children whose reading skills are not quite up to it would be delighted to have an excuse to learn about armadillos this way. And Bertha agrees. And Elizabeth, you're muted, but you can unmute yourself.
Well, yeah, thank you, Mindy. I think that's why I write books, is because even though I'm supposedly grown up, I want to learn more about stuff. So I write books about them. But I discover a lot of things, and that's why it's interesting, is the process of discovery. And so, yeah, if parents or teachers or whatever want to read these books to their kids, I'm sure that the grown-ups will learn as well.
Earlier in your presentation, you talked about the beautiful armadillo. The scientific name like translates to the beautiful armadillo. And that made me think of the eastern screech owl, which is like a little 6-inch tall bird. And its scientific name is Megascops osseo, which literally translates to great, large, eared owl. But they're only this.
Yeah.
And there's, I think, 18 or 28 screech owls, and all of them have that genus, Megascops, which translates to great, large, eared owl. But they're all tiny. So yes, I think scientists do have fun naming. Mindy says, is this book available for sale at the American Museum of Natural History? Or maybe, Elizabeth, you could just say, where is this book?
I doubt that it's there. Most museums use these sort of merchandise companies, like I think it's called Event Group Company or something, and they have a very limited selection of books that they'll buy. I don't think this is available, or the Sloth book. Even though Ross McPhee helped me, he reviewed the manuscript and he's at the American Museum. I wish it were. I would like that, Mindy. If you have any strings you can pull, get the book into the museum bookstore, that'd be great. One of my books is on the Smithsonian gift website. Out of the Blue is at the Smithsonian, but it's really, really hard to get even, books that are directly related to museum exhibits, really hard to get them into the gift stores.
It's a shame because it would be a perfect book for Smithsonian, American Museum of Natural History, for the kids who come in, who are very often fanatics about science. And it's a shame that they would love it.
Yeah, but every publisher will propose that to these companies, but they have a very limited number of books that they'll buy.
Interesting. Unfortunately interesting.
Yeah.
Mariella, if you want to unmute yourself, Bertha asks, is there a problem with the tourist trade? I've unfortunately seen lots of taxidermy ones for sale. And then Michelle says, with any creature that isn't native to the country, touristy gifts are a problem, as some are brought into the country illegally.
It is a problem. I mean, you can find very strange taxidermized 9-banded armadillos for sale in the US, holding beer bottles and stuff like that. And strange enough, there are people who buy that, which I will never understand. But then, yeah, for the smaller species, for example, they're used to make charangos, which are small guitars, traditional music instruments, that actually people don't use anymore, but they're still being sold as to tourists. So unfortunately, then they export them, and as only a handful of species are in the CITES appendices, and their trade is controlled, usually there's not much that is being done. I think the only country I know of that really controls that is New Zealand. I regularly get emails from authorities in New Zealand who confiscate, some taxidermized or a piece of taxidermized armadillo, and they ask me if that is one of the protected species. But other than that, I don't know of any authorities who would really control that and worry about that. But interestingly, we just got a grant as a specialist group to investigate the use of xenartrans as pets, and we want to look into the illegal trade of xenartrans, and that includes actually taxidermized animals and parts of armadillos, sloths, and anteaters. So maybe we will have a webinar about that in a couple of months and have more information about it.
Or in a year.
Or in a year, yeah, we'll see. It will be a slow process because we will have to contact the authorities of range countries, and they're usually a little bit reluctant. They're not too interested in providing that information, so we'll try, because we think it is a problem, but it's difficult to quantify it.
All right, Michelle asked, what is the TIES website again? And Bertha wrote, it's tieseducation.org. And if you're watching this as a recording, it's in the notes below. And then Mariella, you might want to add this. Mindy said it's interesting that armadillos inspired Darwin's theory of evolution.
I think that Darwin started thinking about it while eating armadillos and seeing a glyptodont. And it's interesting to see that there's quite a lot of information, for example, about the diet of peaches that Darwin investigated, because he was eating the peachy, and well, while gutting it, he thought it would be interesting to look at the stomach contents. So I think that's the interesting part about it, that then, associating a live animal with a fossilized, and that was quite a few years ago that he made that connection. I think it's really fascinating. I don't know if it really led to other people, eating it or making that association, but I think it's fascinating. And I think there is a documentary about Darwin that specifically talked about that. It was filmed a couple of years ago, and my peaches appear in that documentary.
Bertha might know this too, but Darwin had his own culinary group at like Oxford, and they would sample different exotic foods.
Yeah. I mean, there's always been a history of naturalists eating armadillos. That is true. I once found a French book, an old description of armadillos that would say, well, this is not that common, which is strange because it doesn't taste good. And then for the other species, you would have the description of the species, and then at the end, this is really a tasty species. So it has been the food or the protein source for a lot of naturalists, not only for indigenous peoples.
But we know the name I was trying to think of was leprosy, of course. So if you do want to eat an armadillo, you got to make sure you cook it really well. Don't eat a half roasted armadillo because you could get leprosy. 9-banded
Yeah.
armadillo.
Yeah, there are quite a lot of diseases that we're studying. So Chagas disease is also one that's caused by a parasite that armadillos can carry. So it's also it's interesting because we still don't know how leprosy is actually being transmitted. So there is a big project being developed about that that will study it in different countries. So maybe we will also have a webinar about that in a couple of months or years, and learn more about the role of armadillos in leprosy transmission.
All right. Well, thank you, Elizabeth, for your presentation. But before we end, Elizabeth, why don't you give us one or two good closing remarks so we don't end it on people eating armadillos and leprosy.
Well, I just think these creatures are so fascinating, and the way that they have adapted and the diversity that they've shown over time is really a great way to learn about how life changes and how life forms evolve. And it's a fun way to bring that information to kids. And I just really appreciate the work that everybody here is doing to kind of communicate and open our eyes up. And I also think kids that are coming from, like my own daughter-in-law is from Mexico. My granddaughter speaks Spanish as her first language. To honor and kind of embrace the natural history of South America and Central America is something that U.S. Schools and teachers and families could do well by. And this is a great way to do it without kind of being didactic about it. We can just learn about these fabulous creatures that share the Americas with us.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you everyone who attended this live, and be sure to check out our upcoming webinar. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you.